Dr. Edmonds, Dr. Anderson, members of the Greensboro branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, ladies and gentlemen. It is certainly a delightful pleasure for me to be in the city of Greensboro and to be able to share with you in the program this evening. I'm very happy to share the platform with these very distinguished ministers and educators. I'm grateful to my friend Reverend Anderson for those very kind words. And I'm grateful to Dr. Edmonds, the president of the branch here, for extending the invitation for me to be here. I'm grateful to him for the courageous work that he is doing in this community, and the courageous work that he is doing for the cause of justice and human dignity. I'm very happy to bring greetings to you this evening from Montgomery, Alabama, a city in a state that is known as the heart of Dixie. And of course, we're all aware of the fact that Dixie has a little heart trouble at this time. But the physicians are at work seeking to cure this heart condition. And I want you to know that the people of Montgomery, the Negro citizens of that city, are deeply grateful to you and to all people of goodwill, to persons all over this world who aided them in the struggle for justice. As we walk the streets of Montgomery, we realize that we were not walking alone, but that hundreds and thousands of people of goodwill walked with us. And above all, God walked with us. Never forget that the Montgomery story is not a story, it's not a drama with only one actor, but it's a drama with 50,000 actors, each playing his part amazingly well. And I hope you will never forget the humble people of that community. You hear a great deal, I imagine, about a fellow by the name of Martin Luther King. You occasionally read his name and you see his picture here and there. But Martin Luther King would not even be mentioned in history if there had not been a Rosa Parks and 50,000 humble people who had the courage to stand up and who said in their hearts that we've had enough, and who somehow came to see that it is ultimately more honorable to walk in dignity than ride in humiliation, and decided to substitute tired feet for tired souls, and walk the streets of Montgomery until the surging walls of the sagging walls of bus segregation were finally crushed by the battering rams of the forces of justice. I was in the Los Angeles airport a few days ago. We had a little delay, a slight plane delay. Plane had to be serviced. I was standing out near the gate, and it so happened that a man was standing next to me that worked for one of the airlines. In a few minutes, we noticed several men running out to that plane. They started carrying out various functions. Most of them were in overalls. You could hardly see the color of the overalls because they were greasy and dirty overalls. That man looked over to me and he said, you know, before that plane can take off, about 21 men have to work on it. They have various functions and they do various jobs, but it can't go until those men get to work and do their jobs. And I looked at them. They were doing various things. Then he turned back to me and said, that group is called the ground crew. And I started thinking that pretty soon that plane would take off and lift itself possibly above the clouds and move on down, passing the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado and on down through the various states, and it would take me successfully home. And I thought about the fact that we hear a great deal about the pilot and the engineer and the co-pilot. But we must never forget that that plane couldn't make its journey without the ground crew. And the same thing applies in this area of freedom. As we take out on this mighty flight of freedom, let us never forget the ground crew. The ground crew, the people who don't make the headlines, the people who make it possible for the pilot to do his job. Let us never forget the ground crew. And I bring you greetings from the humble people, the ground crew of Montgomery, Alabama. But I'm not here this evening to talk about Montgomery. You've heard a lot about Montgomery, and I've spoken a great deal across the country on the Montgomery story, and other ministers from Montgomery and other citizens of that city. So I'm not going to burden you with the Montgomery story. This evening I want to try to answer the question, a desperate question, a poignant question, that seems to be on the lips of people all over this nation. They are disturbed and they are wondering whether there has been any real progress in the area of race relations. And I hope I can give some insights on that question. I certainly can't answer the whole question. I can only make a few suggestions here and there. And at points you will have to draw your conclusions. It seems to me that there are three basic attitudes that one can take toward the question of progress in the area of race relations. The first is that of extreme optimism. You know, optimism is a view that looks on the bright side of things. The extreme optimist would argue that we have come a long way in the area of race relations. He would point proudly to the strides that have been made in the area of civil rights. over the past few decades. And this, he would conclude that the problem is just about solved now, and that we can sit down comfortably by the wayside and wait on the coming of the inevitable. The second view that can be taken is that of extreme pessimism. And you know, pessimism is a view that looks on the dark side of things. So the pessimist in the area of race relations would say that we've made only minor strides. He would argue that the deep rumblings of discontent from the South is indicative of the fact that we have created many more problems than we have solved. He would say that we are going backwards instead of forward. He might even get a little intellectual and seek to show that hovering over every man is a tragic taint of original sin, and so at bottom human nature cannot be changed. He may even turn to the realms of psychology and seek to show the inflexibility of certain attitudes once they had been molded. From all of this, the pessimist would conclude that there can be no progress in the area of race relations. Now I want you to notice one thing here, that the extreme optimist and the extreme pessimist agree on at least one point. They both agree that we must sit down and do nothing in the area of race relations. The extreme optimist says do nothing because integration is inevitable. The extreme pessimist says do nothing because integration is impossible. But that is a third position, that is a third attitude that one can take in this area, namely the realistic position. The realist in the area of race relations seeks to combine the truths of two opposites while avoiding the extremes of both. So the realist would agree with the optimist that we have come a long, long way. But he would go on to balance that by agreeing with the pessimist that we have a long, long way to go. And it is this realistic position that I would like to use as a basis of our thinking together this evening on the question of progress in race relations. We've come a long, long way. But we have a long, long way to go. Let us notice first that we've come a long, long way, and I would like to say first under that particular heading that the Negro himself has come a long, long way in re-evaluating his own intrinsic worth. In order to illustrate this, a little history is necessary. You will remember that it was in the year of 1619 that the first slaves landed on the shores of this nation. They were brought here from the soils of Africa. Unlike the Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth a year later, they were brought here against their wills. Throughout slavery, the Negro was treated in a very inhuman fashion. He was a thing to be used, not a person to be respected. He was just something of a depersonalized cog in a vast plantation machine. The famous Dred Scott decision of 1857 well illustrates the status of the Negro during slavery. For in this decision, the Supreme Court of the nation said the Negro is not a citizen of this nation. He is merely property, subject to the dictates of his own. This was the attitude that prevailed. Living under these conditions, many Negroes lost faith in themselves. Many came to feel that perhaps they were inferior. So long as the Negro accepted this place assigned to him, a sort of racial peace was maintained. But it was a negative peace. It was not true peace. As I said on so many occasions, true peace is not merely the absence of some negative force, it is the presence of some positive force. One of the white citizens of our community in Montgomery was talking with me the other day, and he said, Brother King, the only thing that hurts me and that concerns me is the fact that for so many years we had such peaceful race relations in Montgomery. We had so much harmony and peace in race relations, and now you people have come to upset the peace. I thought about it, and I tried to talk with him sympathetically and calmly. I looked at him and said, well, I guess you're right. We did have peaceful race relations in Montgomery. But it was a negative peace in which the Negro patiently accepted injustice and exploitation and never protested against it. But we never had real peace in Montgomery. We never had a positive peace. We had a negative peace which was merely the absence of tension. But true peace is the presence of justice and brotherhood. One day, Jesus stood before a group of men of his generation. And I can imagine that they stood before the Master with their glittering eyes, wanting to hear something good. And Jesus looked at them and said in no uncertain terms, I come not to bring peace but a sword. Jesus didn't mean he came to bring a physical sword. Neither did he mean he did not come to bring true peace. But what Jesus was saying was this, that I come not to bring this old negative peace which makes for deadening passivity and stagnant complacency. I come to bring positive peace. And whenever I come, a conflict is precipitated between the old and the new. Whenever I come, a division sets in between justice and injustice. Whenever I come, something happens between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. I come not to bring this old negative peace, which is merely the absence of tension, but I come to bring a positive peace, which is the presence of love and brotherhood and the kingdom of God. The peace which Jesus talks about is always a positive peace. So the peace which existed at this particular time in our nation was a negative peace devoid of any positive meaning. Then as the years unfolded, something happened to the Negro. Circumstances made it necessary for him to travel more. His rural plantation background gradually gave way to urban industrial life. His cultural life was gradually rising through the steady decline of crippling illiteracy, and even his economic life was rising through the growth of industry and the power of organized labor and other agencies. All of these forces conjoined to cause the Negro to take a new look at himself. Negro masses all over began to reevaluate themselves, and the Negro came to feel that he was somebody. His religion revealed to him that God loves all of his children and that all men are made in his image. He came to see that every man, from a bass black to a treble white, is significant on God's keyboard. And so he could now unconsciously cry out with the eloquent poet, fleecy locks and black complexion cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skin may differ, but affection dwells in black and white the same. Were I so tall as to reach the pole, or to grasp the ocean at a span, I must be measured by my soul. The mind is the standard of the man. With this new sense of dignity and this new self-respect, a new Negro came into being. The tensions which we witness in the South today can be explained in part by the revolutionary change in the Negro's evaluation of his nature and destiny, and his determination to struggle, suffer, sacrifice, yes, and even die if necessary, until the walls of segregation have been totally crushed. This is the meaning and a part of the meaning of the struggle. We've come a long, long way since 1619. Not only has the Negro come a long, long way in reevaluating his own intrinsic worth, we've come a long, long way in achieving civil rights. And if we are to be true to the facts, we must admit that. 50 years ago, 25 years ago, a year hardly passed that numerous Negroes were not brutally lynched by some vicious mob. Lynchings have about ceased today. We've come a long, long way. 50 years ago, 25 years ago, most of the southern states had a way of preventing the Negro from becoming a registered voter through the poll tax. Now the poll tax has been eliminated in all but 4 states. We've come a long, long way. Even in achieving the ballot, we've come a long, long way. We have a long, long way to go, but we've come a long, long way. At the turn of the century, there were not many Negro registered voters in the South. By 1948, that number had leaped to 750,000. By 1952, that number had leaped to 1,300,000. We've come a long, long way. Even in economic development, we've come a long, long way. And so today, the average Negro wage earner makes 4 times more than the average Negro wage earner of 1940. The national income of the Negro now is more than $16 billion a year, more than the national income of Canada and more than all of the exports of the United States. We've come a long, long way. Not only that, in our generation, we have been able to see the walls of segregation gradually crumble. Many years ago, we were taken away into an Egypt of segregation. And it looked like we would never get out. We were carried that in 1896. The Supreme Court of this nation in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision established the doctrine of separate but equal as the law of the land. And here we were caught up in the Egypt of segregation. And every time we tried to get out, something prevented us. There was always a Moses crying out in loud and noble terms, "Let our people go." In the midst of the cry of every Moses, there was a Pharaoh with a hardened heart saying, "I will not let these people go." There was a Red Sea standing before us with discouraging dimensions, and it looked like we would never get out of Egypt. But God always controls history. He's never asleep on the job. He works at every moment in history. There's something about the God that we worship that can open the Red Sea. And so then there came May 17th, 1954. By the providence of God and a decision from the Supreme Court, the Red Sea opened. And we were able to get out of Egypt. Now we aren't in the promised land yet. There are Philistines and Moabites and Hittites still ahead to be defeated, but at least we've conquered Egypt. We've broken loose from the Egypt of segregation, and we're moving through the wilderness of adjustment toward the promised land of integration. And we are going to get in. Now I know that sometimes it looks difficult, and there are people who are saying we'll never get in. They're the pessimists. And they come back to us and they say, "Now, you know, there are giants over there in that land." There are many giants. There are giants of vested interests, giants of irrational emotionalism, giants of economic power structures. But thank God Caleb and Joshua have been over, and they've come back with a minority report, and they tell us that we can possess the land. And so here this is. So this evening, we stand in this moment of our nation's history, facing the fact that we've come a long, long way since 1896. Now, my friends, I would like to stop here. I really would. This is a good place to stop. I like to make short speeches. I was telling somebody yesterday that I'm getting more and more like my good friend Dr. Mordecai Johnson. I get to the place where I can speak an hour and a half and 2 hours. But I like to make short speeches. And I would really like to stop here. I would really love, this would be a wonderful place to stop. It would be a great place to stop. But I'm afraid if I stopped here, I wouldn't be telling the truth. I'd be stating a fact. You see, a fact is merely the absence of contradiction, but truth is the presence of coherence. It is the relatedness of facts. You see, it's a fact that we've come a long, long way. That's a fact, but it isn't the truth. See, in order to tell the truth, you've got to go on and put the other part to it. If I stopped at this point, I would leave you the victims of a dangerous optimism. If I stopped at this point, I would leave you the victims of an illusion wrapped in superficiality. So in order to tell the truth, I must move on. I say to you that we've not only come a long, long way. So I must say that we've not only come a long, long way, but we have a long, long way to go. And I will not take the time this evening to go into all of the problems which we confront, just to make a general statement to assure you that we have a long, long way to go. I mentioned the fact that lynchings have about ceased in our nation, but other things are happening just as bad. Oh, we must think of the fact that many states in our own Southland have risen up in open defiance of the Supreme Court's decision on desegregation. The legislative halls of the South ring loud with such words as interposition and nullification. Not only that, we see existing in our nation many tones or many instances of physical violence. We see it in the Southland. Little children who merely seek an equal education are often beaten and often slapped and often kicked around. Individuals who merely stand up for the right to live as a first-class human being often confront bombings and sometimes are brutally shot down on their feet. We have a long, long way to go. Even in the area of registration and voting, we have a long, long way to go. Conniving methods are still being used in many of the counties in the Deep South to keep Negroes from becoming registered voters. Often questions are asked, from those technical questions that even a PhD or the best trained lawyer can answer, to the even more technical question of how many bubbles do you find in a bar of soap. We have a long, long way to go. Even in the area of economic justice, we have a long, long way to go. We've come a long, long way, as I just said. But we must still face the fact that 43% of the Negro families of America still make less than $2,000 a year, while just 17% of the white families of America make less than $2,000 a year. 21% of the Negro families of America make less than $1,000 a year, while just 7% of the white families of America make less than $1,000 a year. 88% of the Negro families of America make less than $5,000 a year, while just 60% of the white families of America make less than $5,000 a year. To put it another way, just 12% of the Negro families of America make $5,000 a year or more, while 40% of the white families of America make $5,000 a year or more. So even in the area of economic justice, we have a long, long way to go. More than anything else, segregation is still a fact in America. We have a long, long way to go to conquer segregation itself. It still exists in the South in its glaring and conspicuous form. We still confront it in the North in its hidden and subtle form. Now, as I implied just a few minutes ago, figuratively speaking, old man segregation is on his deathbed. But history has proven that social systems have a great last-minute breathing power. And the guardians of the status quo are always on hand with their oxygen tents to keep the old order alive. And so segregation is still with us, and that are those who are resisting at every point to keep this system of segregation alive. As we assemble here this evening, we assemble, I'm sure, with the knowledge that if democracy is to live, segregation must die. Segregation is a cancer in the body politic which must be removed before our democratic health can be realized. We must come to see the underlying philosophy of segregation is diametrically opposed to the underlying philosophy of democracy and Christianity, and all the dialectics of the logicians cannot make them lie down together. Segregation is a blatant evil. It is against everything that the Christian religion stands for it substitutes the I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship. It relegates the segregated to the status of a thing rather than elevate them to the status of a person. That is something deep down within our Christian religion which says all men are made in the image of God. That is something deep down within our Christian religion which cries out across the generations, in Christ that is neither Jew nor Gentile, bond nor free, male nor female, yes, Negro nor white, but we are all one in Christ Jesus. That is something deep down in our faith which says, out of one blood, God made all men to dwell upon the face of the earth. That is something in our democratic creeds which says all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And segregation ignores all of these things. Therefore, it is an evil which must be removed before our democratic health can be realized. So the job ahead is to work hard. All people of goodwill to remove this evil which stands in our society. It's hurting us internationally, and I will not go into that. For as we look at the rolling tide of world opinion, we come to see that the civil rights issue is not some ephemeral, evanescent domestic issue which can be kicked around by reactionary politicians. But it is an eternal moral issue which may well determine the destiny of our nation in the ideological struggle with communism. The hour is late, the clock of destiny is ticking out, and we must act now before it is too late. The motor is now cranked up. We are moving up the highway of freedom toward the city of equality, and we can't afford to slow up because our nation has a date with destiny. We must keep moving. There are those who are saying, yes, we've got to apply moderation. We've got to adopt a policy of moderation. Well, if moderation means moving on toward the goal of justice with wise restraint and calm reasonableness, then moderation is a great virtue that all men of goodwill must seek to achieve in this 10th period of transition. But if moderation means slowing up in the move for justice and capitulating to the whims and caprices of the guardians of a deadening status quo, then moderation is a tragic vice which all men of goodwill must condemn. We must keep moving because the hour is late, and our nation is now on trial. Now I want to say to you just a few things that we must do to go this additional distance. And I want to say a few things that we as Negroes can do. I know that other agencies must be at work. There's a great job for the federal government to do. I wish I had time to go into that. There's a great job that the Christian church must do. I wish I had time to go into that. We know all too well that the Christian churches too often had a high blood pressure of creeds and an anemia of deeds in this area of grace. We had to face the tragic facts for so long that Sunday morning when we stood to sing in Christ, that is no east or west, we stood in the most segregated hour of Christian America. Thank God we're beginning now to shake the lethargy from our eyes. And Christian ministers all over the South and all over this nation are taking stands now. Thank God for that. And the church must continue to act. Oh, there are things that white persons of goodwill can do, both north and south. And I wish I had time to go into that because I believe firmly that there are many more white persons of goodwill in our Southland than we're able to see on the surface. There are some in Montgomery, Alabama. Don't you think all of the white persons in the South believe in segregation? And then there are some who believe in segregation. They were brought up under the system. They were taught that in their school books. They were taught that by their parents, and it's understandable why they believe in segregation. But even though they sincerely believe that integration is wrong, they at least believe in law and order. They don't believe in physical violence. And I think we have great things to work on in this Southland. I do not think that the Easterns and the Talmadges and the Griffins voice the sentiment of the Southern white persons. I don't think they voice the sentiments of all. They voice the sentiment of a vocal but small minority. I feel that a person like Lillian Smith of Georgia, Harry Ashmore of Arkansas, Frank Graham of North Carolina, even Dr. Billy Graham of North Carolina, and hundreds and thousands of white persons of goodwill are voicing the sentiments of millions of white persons. And so let us see the road in the white South. And I believe that there are millions of liberals in our Southland. And I appeal to them in the name of God and for the cause of human dignity and in the interest of democracy to join hands and gird that courage and take a stand now, because this is the hour to do it. Above all of that, above and beyond all of that, there are some things that we must do. And that's what I want to deal with in the next few minutes before us. Things that we must do to go this additional distance if we are to achieve first-class citizenship in this hour. We must maintain a continuing sense of dignity and self-respect. Let nobody make you feel that you are inferior. Feel somehow that you are somebody. And although you have to live under a system which stares you in the face every moment and say you're less than, you're not equal to, live in the midst of that system and affirm your own sense of dignity by saying deep down in your heart, I'm somebody. I'm somebody. I'm somebody because I'm a child of God. He is my Father and He loves all of His children. And if I'm His child, He loves me just as He loves other children. Maintain a continuing sense of dignity and never become a slave in your mind. You see, one can be mentally free while physically enslaved. I've never been on the back of a bus. I came up in Atlanta, Georgia. I went to school on the other side of town. There was only one high school in Atlanta. I never will forget the experiences that I had. A city of almost 200,000 Negroes, and it only had one high school at that time. It has more now, but that was back in 1942 and 3 and 4. I remember every day having to ride the buses from one side of town to the other to get to school. Those buses were segregated. We had to sit on the back. But I'm here to tell you this evening that I never took a seat on the back of the buses. I was only that physically, but my mind was up on the front. Always there. And I said to myself at that hour, one of these days, my body is going to be up there where my mind is. So let us maintain the continuing sense of dignity. Let us never feel that we are inferior. You know the job that Moses confronted when he was trying to lead the children of Israel out of the promised land? out of Egypt into the promised land? He had some people there, and 3 groups developed. You notice that. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the picture, the 10 Commandments, and it's there. You can see it in that picture, and you see it as you read the Bible. 3 groups developed, and this is always the problem in going up freedom's road. You had a certain group of people who became so conditioned to Egypt. See, you can become so conditioned to certain things that you even if you get your freedom, you'll still act like you used to act. That's possible. It just becomes so conditioned. And Moses had that group to deal with. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They said, now we prefer the flesh pots of Egypt to being out here in the wilderness trying to get to the promised land. You know there are some Negroes like that. They have come to the point that they just like segregation. They feel that that's just what they deserve. I was in the Atlanta airport the other day, and I was standing there so that there was a little time waiting between flights, and went in the men's room, and there was a Negro attendant in there. And I just went on in the room which said men day. I saw over there had one said colored, that said colored men. But I just decided I was a man, and I decided I was going into men's room. went on in, and this attendant in there came running to me. The colored room is over there. I didn't pay any attention to him. Mister, the colored room is over there. This is the white room here. So I got tired of him pushing on me and punching me, and I said, sir, I'm all right. Now, mark you, the white people in there, it was full of white people. They hadn't said one thing to me. It was the Negro. So I stopped and I said, brother, do you mean to tell me every time you find it necessary to go to the restroom, you go out of here and go way over there to the corner? Well, yes, sir, that's where we belong. Now, I first reacted with a little bitterness, but then I understood. I became very sympathetic. That man had come up under the system, and he had come to believe that Negroes didn't deserve anything else. There was a place, and things were to be separated. And the system had done that. That's what segregation does. There is a danger that segregation will give you this sense of inferiority. And so you feel that this is what you deserve, and this is where you belong. And that's what the Supreme Court decision tried to cure. That's one of the things it said, that segregation gives a sense of inferiority to the segregated. But I'm urging you this evening to maintain a sense of self-respect. There was one group that Moses had to confront, that group that preferred Egypt to the Promised Land. Then he had a second group. They were the school teachers and the people who really wanted freedom, but they didn't want to face the sacrifices that were involved in it. They were always talking about, I might lose my job if I try to go on to the front. Now, they wanted freedom. They wanted it. They wanted freedom. They wanted to enjoy freedom, but they didn't want to face the sacrifices involved in gaining freedom. Moses had to deal with that group of fearful persons, that group of individuals who, because they were in partially vulnerable positions, they used that as an excuse for complacency. And then he had a third group, and that's a group that is always a group that carries history on. He had a group of people who were willing to go on in spite of the odds, in spite of the difficulties. They knew the mountains, the obstacles ahead, but they said, we're going on. We're going on with you, Moses. And we are willing to face anything because we know that our destiny is in the Promised Land. Let us not fit into the group that wanted to go back to Egypt. Let us not become a part of that group that is somehow living in a state of fear, afraid to act, accepting things that one does not have to accept. But let us get in line with that third group and maintain a continuing sense of self-respect. Let me rush on to say that we must seek to gain the respect of others by improving our own standards. I don't want to stay on this too long, and I know the danger of what I'm about to say because it can be misinterpreted. And let me rush on to say that some of our standards lag behind, we must admit. They lag behind because of segregation. I'm convinced of that. I think it is a torturous logic to use the tragic effects of segregation as an argument for the continuation of it. A man told me in Montgomery, Alabama, that integration is all right, but it needs to be put off for about 75 years because Negroes aren't ready, they aren't ready culturally and academically, and they'll pull the white race back a generation. And my answer to him was that certainly that isn't true. You can't say that's true of all Negroes. The second thing is that these conditions exist because of segregation. And the thing to do is to remove the cause. Don't be dealing around only with the effects, but go on down and remove the cause. Don't just give an aspirin here, but go on down to the surgical point and get to the cause of the thing. But we have to admit that at points our standards do lag behind. And we need to work on these things as we work to remove the cause. We have a dual responsibility. We must work to remove the basic cause of all of our problems, our economic insecurity, our cultural lag, our health lag, and all of that. And at the same time, we must work to improve these effects that have come into being as a result of segregation. Now, we just have to face it. We kill each other too much. We have to face that. Our crime rates are still too high. We've got to face that. And we've got to improve on that. We must face the fact that there are so many areas and there are so many things that we can do. And let us stop now and sit down by the wayside and pull down the curtains of our lives and the shades and look at ourselves and say, can we improve ourselves here? Look at the complaints that many of the white reactionaries have against us. And remove those that don't make any sense. If they aren't true, well, just push them aside. They say we want to be integrated because we want to marry their daughters. Well, we know that isn't true. We know that isn't true. The Negro's concern basically isn't to be the white man's brother-in-law, but to be his brother. We know that's true. But there are other things. There are other things that are said. And if they are true, let's do something about it. If our health standards lag behind, let's do something about them. Oh, it may not be possible for us to take a flight tomorrow morning and fly over to Paris and buy the most expensive perfumes, but all of us can be clean. Anybody can buy a nickel bar soap. We don't have to say something. Let us improve our moral standards. We don't have to have the highest illegitimate rate in every city. We don't need to do it. We don't have to have a PhD degree or an MA degree or an AB degree. We don't have to have a lot of money to be good and honest and moral and upright. We must convince the white man that as we walk the streets, we are not walking around thinking about sex every day, for we know that we are made for eternity, created for the everlasting, born for the stars. And that is something deep down within us that gives us a sense of our own moral integrity and well-being. And where we don't have it, let us improve it. Let us demand the respect from others by improving our own standards where they can be improved, so that we deal with it. Let us continue to gain the ballot, gain political power through wise use of the ballot. Now, I'm not here to tell you how to vote. That is my concern. I'm not a politician. I have no political ambitions. I don't think the Republican Party is a party full of the Almighty God, nor is the Democratic Party. They both have weaknesses. And I'm not inextricably bound to either party. I'm not concerned about telling you what party to vote for. But what I'm saying is this, that we must gain the ballot and use it wisely. I've come to see recently that one of the most decisive steps that the Negro can take is that short walk to the voting booth. And don't put it all on resistance. It's true that in many areas in my state of Alabama, Negroes aren't registered in many instances because they can't register, because the resistance is strong, because the registrars refuse to register. But I don't think that's true in Greensboro, North Carolina. Many Negroes aren't registered because they're too lazy to go down and get registered. And you have here, and we have in many cities all over the South, the opportunity to gain the ballot. And even where we have strong resistance, we have a civil rights bill now, which I hope will help us a great deal. So let us go out to gain the ballot and to use it wisely. Let us continue to give big money for the cause of freedom. Integration is not some lavish dish that will be passed out by the white man on a silver platter while the Negro merely furnishes the appetite. We've got to do more than that. We've got to sacrifice, and we're going to have to give some money. The days ahead are still days of difficulty. We still have a long, long way to go. And let us use our money wisely. We can't say any longer that we don't have it. I just mentioned a few minutes ago that we have an annual income now of almost $17 billion a year. And we get almost everything else we want. We ride around in some of the biggest cars that have ever been let loose into history. And I'm not condemning this. I know how it is. I know that these things, we want to have some of the basic goods of life. We want to have some of the luxuries of life. But what I'm saying, let's maintain a sense of values. We don't have time to spend a lot of money on whiskey and big parties and a lot of stuff, and we aren't giving money to the basic causes that confront us now. It will be an indictment on the Negro if it is revealed that we spend more money on frivolities than we spent on the cause of freedom and justice. And I've been in situations, I've seen us in many of our social groups, our fraternal and our Masonic and our Elks and what have you, spending more money on frivolities than we spent on the cause of freedom and justice. I remember one year that a certain fraternity assembled with another fraternity and spent in 1 week $500,000 on whiskey. That's what the paper reported. Negroes spend more money in 1 week, just a handful in 1 week, than the whole Negro race spent that whole year for the NAACP and the United Negro College Fund. Now that's tragic. That's tragic, my friend. We've got to get a sense of values. Now you don't like some of these things I'm saying. You're not saying amen too much right there and here. But I'm saying things that I think are basic for us. Things that are basic. Not only that, we must continue to develop wise, courageous, and sincere leadership. This is a need all over the South and all over the nation. We need leaders who are sincere, leaders of integrity, leaders who are intelligent, leaders who avoid the extremes of hot-headedness and Uncle Tomism, leaders who somehow have the vision to see the issues and have the courage to stand there, leaders not in love with money but in love with humanity, leaders not in love with publicity but in love with justice. Oh, this is the great need of this hour. As I look out and as I look over our nation, God has given many of you talent. God has given many of you economic resources. He's given you educational resources. And this is a challenge and the opportunity of the hour to use these things to furnish leadership for our nation in this hour. Let none of us become so high on the intellectual, the economic ladder, or any of these particular ladders that we become separated from the problems that the masses of people confront. Let us discover that we will never get into the promised land until all of us get there together. And we must separate. Oh, we need leaders at this hour all over this nation. God, give us leaders. A time like this demands great leaders. Leaders whom the lust of office does not kill. Leaders whom the spoils of life cannot buy. Leaders who have honor. Leaders who will not lie. Leaders who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking. Tall leaders, sun-crowned, who live above the fog in public duty and in private thinking. That is one of our great needs as we go on this additional distance. I'm coming now to the conclusion. Before ending, I want to say one basic thing to you. Let us, as we move on, continue to struggle with the weapons of love and nonviolence. We must work passionately and unrelentingly for first-class citizenship, but let us not use second-class methods to gain it. And that is the danger. As I look over the long and broad struggle of oppressed people, it seems to me that there are three ways for oppressed people to deal with their oppression. And I want to ask you to choose one of them tonight, and I hope you will choose the right one. One is to rise up against your oppressor with hate and physical violence and to break loose from oppression through armed revolt. This is a method that we all know about. Those of us who live in America know about it. It has become something of the inseparable twin of Western imperialism. It is even the hallmark of its grandeur. We know about it. And I'm not here to say to you tonight that victories can be won through violence. If a person says that victory has never been won through violence, he doesn't know history. Nations have received their independence through violence. I know that. But that is the problem. Violence only brings about temporary victories, never permanent peace. We're coming to see in our world today the futility of violence, not only in the racial struggle, but in the international struggle. It is no longer the choice between violence or nonviolence. It is today nonviolence or non-existence. In a day when Sputniks and explorers dash around outer space, nobody can win a war. We must come to see now that violence is not the way. If the Negro succumbs to the temptation of using violence in his struggle, unborn generations will be the recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness. And our chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos. There is still a voice crying through the vista of time, saying to every potential Peter, put up your sword. History is replete with the bleached bones of nations. Way that I discussed a little earlier, that is through acquiescence or resignation. Just resign yourself to the fate of oppression. People have done that. They just accept it, and they resign themselves to it, and they adjust to it. But there again, that isn't the way. Non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. And if somehow I accept segregation without letting the segregator know that I don't like it, I'm cooperating with him, and I am just as evil in doing that as he is in carrying on the system. For the religion says to every man that you are your brother's keeper. And if I make my brother think that I like segregation when I don't really like it, if I tell him that I like the way I'm treated when I don't really like it, I'm not his keeper, for I cooperate with him in evil. And so the way is not to acquiesce and resign oneself to the fate of oppression. So we come to a third way. That is a way of nonviolent resistance, where we resist, and yet we do it through nonviolent means. We stand up with a powerful no to injustice, but with a powerful yes to brotherhood and love. It seems to me that this is the way that all over we must organize nonviolently, en masse, to resist the system of segregation. But at the same time, we must maintain love in our hearts, and we must move with the method of nonviolence. And if we will do that, I think we will be able to transform a dark night into a glowing daybreak. I think we will be able to make of this old world a new world. Somehow we must be able to look our southern brothers in the eye, those who would mistreat us, those who must misuse us, and believe that unearned suffering is redemptive. Let us prepare ourselves for a little suffering. Let us, if it's necessary, be the victims of violence, but never the perpetrators of violence. Then we will be able to stand before our brothers in the South and say, we will match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. bomb our homes, and we'll still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our communities at the midnight hours and take us out on some wayside road and beat us and leave us there half dead, and we will still love you. Run all around the country to make it appear that we are not fit morally and culturally for integration, and we will still love you. Take our children and spit in their faces and slap them if you may, and we will still love you. So this, it seems to me, is the way that's open for us. And I give you a personal testimony of my own faith. I believe, my friends, as I leave Greensboro, that we're gonna do this. We will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. And then one day we will win our freedom, but not only will we win our freedom, we will so appeal to your heart and conscience that we will win you in the process. And our victory will be public. Certainly we have been in the presence tonight of a great man. To say mere words, to express gratitude would, all that we could say would be completely inappropriate. Thank you very much, Dr. King. I'm sure that we will be a better people for your having come and walked and talked with us.
Dr. King, we read about what's going on in Alabama and New York, but actually, what is happening in what are the people?
Well, are you speaking now of the Negro people or the white people? Or?
Primarily of the Negro people, but I suppose we can separate the two.
Well, I would say that the Negro people of Montgomery are more determined now, I guess, than ever before to achieve first-class citizenship or human dignity, whatever you want to call it. There is a determination now, more than ever before. The bus boycott instilled within the Negro a sense of dignity and a sense of destiny that is still a part of this sense of dignity and destiny. So that on the one hand, you find this determination by the Negro community. On the other hand, you have a group, I would say, I don't know how many because it's difficult to tell, but you have a group of persons in the white community who are somewhat bitter because of the bus protests, and they feel that giving in at that point is only was on the way of giving in on problems in other areas, an eventual breakdown of the whole system. So that there are many of these persons are bitter, and they are just as determined to preserve segregation as Negroes are to liquidate. Then we can't stop there. There are persons of goodwill in the white community of Montgomery who are quite silent today because of fear. But nevertheless, persons of deep concern and persons who are really willing to comply with the law of the land. Now, this just gives some idea of some of the attitudes that prevail, and I'm sure there are other attitudes that prevail. But these are the main ones, I believe.
What do the Negroes think, what do the Negroes think about what's happening in our
Well, there are so many facets to the Arkansas situation, and I haven't talked with too many people about it. Are you thinking mainly of what they think of Governor Forbes, or what they think of the president sending federal troops in, or what they think of the children themselves who have been able to stand up amid this? Oh, well, I think the general consensus is that these 9 children who have gone to Central High need the greatest commendation and praise for their ability to stand with so much dignity amid such tragic, not only intimidation, but harassments and actual violence, because many of them have faced violence. So there has been a tremendous respect. And I think it has given the people themselves a new sense of dignity. The fact that these young people could stand up with so much courage and yet so much dignity in the midst of all of the abuses that they've had to confront.
Dr. King, I understand you're heading a group which is trying to stimulate voting and registration among the Negroes in the South. Now, just exactly what is the program and what has been its effectiveness?
Well, the program really hasn't started yet. We will have tomorrow night in 21 cities across the South simultaneous mass meetings which will kick off the voting crusade. This is we're calling it the Crusade for Citizenship, attempting to double the number of Negro registered voters by 1960. This, we can't say yet what will come as a result of it. It hasn't been started. But we feel that with the cooperation of all of the segments and all of the agencies that work in this area in the South, we will be able to do the job. But it hasn't been started yet. It starts out tomorrow. And we hope to follow up. These mass meetings are just serving to stimulate interest and let the public know that we are beginning this South-wide crusade. And then we will get to the grassroots and we will go into communities and set up some type of voting committee where you have no existing committees and help others where you have existing committees, help them in any way that we possibly can, financially, staff-wise, and in terms of educational literature.
Dr. King, I have another question. Do you think that Eisenhower handled the situation, the Little Rock situation, do you think it was effective at all, or just what is your opinion about the method in which he did handle it?
Well, I think it's unfortunate for young people, young high school students to have to go to school under the protection of federal troops. I think it's even more unfortunate for the governor of the state of Arkansas, through irresponsible statements and actions, to leave the president with no other alternative. Under our system, which is a system of law and a system, I should say supposedly of law, the president had no other alternative. That's what I'm saying. It has come to the point that integration or segregation is no longer the question. The question was anarchy or law and order. And the president had no alternative. Even if he had been a segregationist, I don't think he would have had any other alternative, because it had come to the point that there was a breakdown of law and order. And this was all the president could do. Now, on the other hand, I think certain constructive things could have been done by the administration beforehand to make the South a little more conducive for integration. I think at many points the forces of goodwill went to sleep and they failed to take a stand where they should have, and the negative forces of evil took over. And if the president, as well as other public officials, had taken a stronger stand in the beginning, maybe the Little Rock situation would have been prevented altogether.
Doctor, I have just a few questions. Now, you talk about forgiveness, and that you must forgive. Do you find that really in your heart you can forgive the man who, say, killed Emmett Till or castrated this innocent man? And don't you find it really hard?
Well, if you really love on the basis of Christian concept, forgiveness is very difficult. It isn't easy. And when it becomes so easy, it really isn't forgiveness. There is pain and agony. A husband who loves his wife or vice versa, when one makes a tragic mistake, can't forgive easy. But it's possible. And when I say forgiving, I don't mean that this is something weak or this is something just a sentimental sort of thing. I think ultimately it is the only norm and method of reconciliation, whether it's in social life or whether it's in individual relations. It's very difficult, and it's very hard not to become bitter towards such persons. But forgiveness has great psychological value. Not only does it have healing social power, but it has psychological power. If I'm bitter toward a man, it hurts me as much as it hurts him. And I think psychologists are telling us today that hate not only hurts the hated, but it hurts the hater as much. So for me not to forgive the people who killed Emmett Till or the people who mutilated the man in Birmingham, I am setting in my very personality a structure of evil which can cause a disintegration in my personality. And so that it has both power of psychological, individual integration as well as social integration.
Were the Negroes in Alabama surprised at the conviction of these men?
I was not too surprised, and yet some people were. I felt that had come to the point of such tragic inhumanity and barbarity that even a jury would have convicted them. I mean, of segregationists.
Yeah.
I felt that had gone so far that the very horrible situation. Now I could, and I said that in the midst of the fact of knowing that a few weeks earlier they had dropped all of the bombing cases on Montgomery. But this was something different. Here you had a human being that you could point to who had been the victim of something that's just uncivilized.
Just one other question. What has been your greatest moment of fear? I think it would be unfair to ask you if you've ever been afraid.
Oh, sure. I don't know what I would say has been my greatest moment of fear.
Would it have been a continuing process?
I would say that during the early in the month of January of 1956, when the threats had risen to almost astronomical proportions, that is 30 and 40 threats a day.
Mail.
Well, not only the mail, but telephone calls. And I came to a point in that period that I actually got afraid. After that, I believe there were very few moments that I actually got afraid because I had girded myself for the things ahead, which I hadn't done at that time. I had the illusion in the beginning that number one, Montgomery was a pretty good-sized town, and it had not been known as a violent community. So I just didn't think there would be any violence. I said that from the beginning, that we wouldn't have the violence in Montgomery. And I didn't think we'd get many threats. So I started out with an illusion, and that's why I think I was a little more fearful in the beginning than I was later, because I had gone through the process of adjusting to the inevitable later, and I had certain religious experiences that gave me something within to confront all of these threats that later came.
Are you a native of Alabama?
No, I'm a native of Atlanta, Georgia. Yes, very good.
I'll listen tonight.
Good.